Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are here at Kantipur Conclave 2022. To everyone watching us online via Kantipur Television HD, Kantipur Cineplex HD, and eKantipur, we would like to welcome all of you once again. We're here at day one of Kantipur Conclave 2022, Beyond Boundaries and Beyond Expectations. This is the fourth session, Nepal and the world. This is definitely going to be very, very interesting and intriguing. Nepal, sandwiched between two emerging superpowers, India and China, is navigating a complicated geopolitical landscape. A developing country such as Nepal is also disproportionately affected by global challenges such as the climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic. This session will center around how global and geopolitical challenges affect Nepal and how to navigate it using knowledge from Nepalese who have made their own mark in the world. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our fabulous panelists for this session. Aneka Rajbhandari, co-founder of Arniko project. I'd also like to invite on stage Iqbal Singh Sevea, Director, Institute of South Asian Studies, National University of Singapore. We'd also like to invite on stage Nilanjan Ghosh, Director, Observer Research Foundation, ORF. Please do join me in welcoming Ambassador Dr. Shankar Prashad Sharma, Economist and Diplomat, on stage to complete this panel that we have for the fourth session here at Kantipur Conclave 2022, Nepal and the world. And now, inviting the man who will bring this session together, our moderator for this session, Mr. Sujeev Shakya, founder and CEO of BEAD, which is also the knowledge partner of Kantipur Conclave 2022. And ladies and gentlemen, the stage is all set for this session, so I would now like to kindly request our moderator, Mr. Shakya, to kindly take this session forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Sadiksha. Thank you for the introduction to the panel, and I think I would like to, since we have 45 minutes, and just for the panelists to know that there's a clock right out there. And so we'll try to make it as conversational as possible. Sadiksha set the stage for our panel, and I think when we are talking about Nepal and the world, for Nepal, the world has changed dramatically in the past 25 years as Nepalis started to moving outside, and we have people, in 180 countries. We have some of the pioneers of the non-resident Nepali movement here. I can see Dr. Upendra Mahto, Balami Chane was here. So from there, we have connected beyond India, and then we have China on the north, getting interested in what's happening in Nepal, and also the geopolitics is changing, as as Professor Shankar Menon put up today morning as he was setting the stage with the keynote address. So that's where the changes are. And among the panelists, I think we have Aneka Rajbhandari, starting with the Arniko project, Iqbal Sevea with Director, National University of Singapore, ISAS, Nilanjan Ghosh, ORF, and Ambassador Dr. Shankar Sharma. So what we are going to do is start with a quick round of 2-3 minutes of introductions around what you're doing, and then we will get into some more detailed discussions around the issues that we are looking at. So maybe it's also good to know about your institutions. So maybe let's start with Aneka to say what does Arniko project do? What do you guys do?
So thank you for asking this question, actually. And the Arniko project it actually started as a personal initiative. Me and the co-founder, as well as the other, we were both in Peking University. And whenever we told people that we were studying in China, they would ask us immediately about what are Chinese people thinking about this matter, that matter. And we thought, we all, of course, have our perspective on it, but we realized that people need to have their own perspective as well. So this is a personal initiative that we started that aims to break two firewalls. One, as we all know it, in China is the internet, and the second one is the language. So by translating Nepal-related content from Chinese to English, we allow people to have their own perspective more authentically on Chinese perspective. And as well as like without getting lost in translation or other biases as well as interpretation.
Thank you, Aneka. So maybe I move on to Nilanjan to talk a bit about ORF, Observer Research Foundation, and especially the Center for New Diplomacy Initiative. We've done work together, so it'd be good to introduce the institutions that you're affiliated with.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sujeev. Uh, Observer Research Foundation is a policy research think tank working in the domains of geostrategy, geoeconomics, economy and growth, SDGs, inclusive growth, climate change, space programs, policies. In fact, touching almost all the endeavors which affect the human existence. As far as the Center for New Economic Diplomacy is concerned, this was conceived of in 2019. And the idea was that the changing geoeconomic and the geopolitical forces that have been affecting the space, especially the space of the Indo-Pacific and the broader space as well, need to be looked at through a different lens altogether. And not only that, in fact, diplomacy also needs to be relooked at through an economic lens with the usage of economic instruments, as also, in fact, analyzing the various economic forces that are affecting this broader space. Now, in the process, what happened was that we've had been looking at development cooperation, trilateral cooperation, but the other SDGs and the inclusive growth aspects of the human endeavors also started being included in this particular center. So right now, that's what this center is all about. I think primarily with certain geographies like the African landmass, the BIMSTEC, as also, in fact, in this part of the world.
Thanks. I think it's one of the exciting things that the Center for New Diplomacy Initiative does is, which I get very excited about, is the Kigali Dialogues. The second edition happened in August, so it's about connecting different regions. So maybe go to Iqbal to share a bit about NUS ISAS institution. Also, I have my own personal affiliations too.
It's a gathering of friends, isn't it? The Institute of South Asian Studies, Research Institute based in National University of Singapore. As the name would suggest, we study contemporary South Asia, focus on a number of thematic issues, including geopolitics, multilateralism, increasingly minilateralism as well. We look at trade and economics. We look at connectivity issues. We also look at the diaspora as well. So this is something an eye on as well. And we are recently, we are prioritizing developing an entire research focus on sustainability and climate change. So I'm delighted to hear the conversations going on here.
Thank you, Iqbal. Of course, Dr. Shankar Sharma doesn't need much introduction, apart from being a diplomat. He's worked as in different government agencies here. And I think let me just shift gears and go directly into the area that we keep discussing about. After your appointment as the ambassador to India, you have been very active. At least the social media we see, you've been revitalizing the ties. So where do you see the changes that are happening in India? How is India seeing the neighborhood, and how are you observing that, and especially on Nepal? So we may start with that.
Yeah, thank you, Sujeevji. After the visits of the two prime ministers to each other's country, like the prime ministers of Nepal to India and then Prime Minister Modi ji to Nepal, I think it has created a very positive environment in a number of aspects. I think when I say number of aspects, I'll say that the trust and confidence I have observed that it has been enhanced. I can talk with Indian authorities, both in the government as well as in the non-governmental level, with confidence and trust. I think that's what my observation is. And the second area is the communication has also been enhanced, both in terms of government to government. When I say government to government, I think there was also some restrictions earlier because of COVID-19 pandemic. Now the working groups and number of committees between Nepal and India, they have started meeting very regularly. And then if we see in the non-governmental level, I think there has been number of dialogues and discussions between the academicians of the two countries over the last 3-4 months. So the communication has also enhanced. Third area, which is of great importance to most of the people in Nepal, including myself, what will happen and what is the implementation status of some of the issues that has been raised between the two prime ministers in Delhi as well as in Lumbini. But if you go by some of the things that has yet to be published, that has yet to be finalized, that has yet to be signed, there are a number of things that have been taken forward. As for example, the supply of fertilizer to Nepal for the next 5 years, ensure the supply security in the country, that has been signed. And I just asked with some of the authorities days ago, they are very happy in the sense that probably they will get the fertilizer even in a cheaper price compared to the international price. Second area, I think we were talking for the last several years. In fact, we were talking about this Bhairava ICP more than a decade ago. I think that was agreed. Now, fortunately, I think that has land acquisition has been solved in the side. Nepali side has also been solved. Not only that, I think there is a new ICP being taken forward. The energy issue, I don't have to say anything about that. You can see from Kulman Gising's face how happy he is, and then how I think elaborative he can talk about those. Not only that, I think there are a number of projects that has been signed in terms of MOU between Nepal and India. And then hopefully when we have those projects, and that will be guaranteed to supply to India. And then there has been also this training program of the civil servants in Nepal. I think we have been pushing that one for the last several years, taking place very soon. So number of areas, I think, and then we are hoping that over the next 5 to 6 months, probably more activities between Nepal and India that has been raised in the bilateral meeting be taking forward. So I think I am optimistic given the last 4 or 5 months activities between Nepal and India. And then I think once the confidence and trust they are developed, many things can be addressed and.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Sharma. So I think let's move on from, so for being in Nepal, if you talk about India, then we have to talk about China. And for this event, we were trying to see if we could get some Chinese think tanks, but there are still travel restrictions in terms of quarantining and others. So we said, okay, why not we get someone from Nepal who's looking at China? And so, Aneka, China has been in the center of global conflicts, and whether with the United States, whether with the current way in which it is aligned as far as the crisis in Ukraine is concerned. So what are some of the, and you've been writing a lot on what's coming out in the Chinese media and what the Chinese perspectives are coming. So what are some of the 2-3 things that are broad strokes we can talk about? And then what are some of the perspectives and how does it relate to Nepal?
So as you mentioned that China is definitely in the center of conflict. China is engaging with the world, as well as the world is also having difficulties understanding China properly. And with the 20th National Congress approaching next month, and which will lay the path for China's future, we can definitely expect China to be more inward-looking, as well as more ideologically driven, as we've already seen so far. So I feel like it's also very confusing and conflicting to understand China because they've also made it that way. An example is China explicitly says that they do not want to export the Chinese model. But at the same time, you would also have them doing consultative events, doing experience sharing. And I really hope that these developing countries know the difference between exporting the model as well as learning from the success and failure of it. So, and at the same time, China is also aggressively trying to oppose all of these Western influence in these. So this is kind of conflicting, I would say. Another issue that is there is that there's a lack of effort, I would see. So recently, last month in August 1, Nepal and China was supposed to celebrate the 67th anniversary. And no effort was made either side. And I would say this is kind of a dramatic failure. It is also the People's Liberation Army Day, which they mentioned, but they didn't mention about the diplomatic relations. But despite this reluctance we've seen that there are a lot of party-to-party exchanges happening. In fact, I think Nepal is the country in South Asia that with the most party-to-party interaction, exchange, communication. So this is definitely something that we have to consider, that not just state-to-state relations, but party-to-party relation is very important when you're looking at China. And since 2015, we've definitely seen Chinese presence in Nepal, but I feel like more recently we've seen China's presence stronger, but also in a more political way. And I'd just like to take the example of MCC over here and share a little bit of perspective that was in the Chinese media. So I really closely watched Chinese media and what they think about Nepal. And especially in MCC, we saw that China was definitely unhappy about the whole MCC passing over here. And before that, they definitely had very, very strong views. And the way they interpreted MCC was very interesting because, of course, they have to interpret it in a way that not just the government understands, but also the people understand. So the way MCC was narrated was compared to their unequal tea treaties that China suffered and which caused the long years of humiliation. So there was one quote that really stuck with me, and it was all over the Chinese media. And it was actually a quote by a military strategist back then during the dynasties, but it was used more in context by a former premier in China when he was forced to sign an unequal treaty. And it was 弱国无外交, which basically means weak states have no diplomacy. And that's pretty much how we have been perceived so far after passing of MCC.
Thank you. Aneka, so two things. So we are perceived as a weak state, and definitely party-to-party relationship takes priority, be it with India or with China, or over government to government. And I think that's a big challenge we have to navigating on both sides. So I'll just turn around to Nilanjan, sitting in Kolkata and looking at the region. Of course, there's India, China, and the region where BBIN you're looking at. So where do you see Nepal in this whole discourse as sitting in Kolkata? Now, we are here, are pretty much inundated on what's happening between India and China. That's where we see and ways in which opinions and the way in which perception that shapes are so different. So how are you seeing it? And of course, there's been very little physical interaction, a lot over Zoom and phone calls and WhatsApp, so yeah.
Right. See, I look at this entire region, an integrated ecosystem from the Himalayas to the Bay. Now, if I'm talking of an integrated natural ecosystem, let me just pose this entire hypothesis in a different way. Let us look at this as an integrated social, ecological, economics. And if I have to look at it in that fashion, then the first and foremost condition that needs to be satisfied is that of physical connectivity. Now, we know, you talked about the BBIN brought that issue. Now, yes, there have been issues as far as the motor vehicles agreement is concerned, but that is primarily because of Bhutan's reservations related to the congestion and the pollution that, in fact, the number of cars, number of vehicles that are going to ply out there is going to bring about. But barring this motor vehicles agreement, there are various other forces that can work in the BBI. The first is when I was looking at what we call in trade economics, trade intensity index. There's a huge underutilized potential in that domain, whether it's in the context of export intensity or import intensity. Now, if we create some kind of I wouldn't call it a free trade area barely from that perspective, but suppose, say, an integrated economic zone where not only free trade, but suppose in the context of investment, smooth flow of capital happening all across the zone, then in fact, the multiplier effect of this region in terms of, say, 1 unit invested or 1 rupee, $1 invested, the multiplier effect of that is going to be, suppose it might be the tune of $3 or $4. In fact, very recently we carried out this analysis in the context of India. 1 Indian rupee invested in capital expenditure, that is, say, for physical capital, has a multiplier effect of 2.6. Now think of this region as I said, as a social, ecological, economic system. What is missing here? If I look at, rather reconceptualize this hypothesis as what the United Nations Environment Programme recently came up with in 2018, the inclusive wealth approach, rather than talking only of the GDP. We are talking in terms of social capital, natural capital, physical capital, and human capital. We have human capital, a massive pool of human capital, untapped human capital in this. All we need to do is there has to be enhancement of this human capital through skilling, through education, and naturally bringing in better technology and other things. We have a massive pool of natural capital. Just think of the natural capital that exists in the BBIN. What we have social capital in terms of social relations, embedded social culture, and all these things. What is lacking largely? The physical capital, that is the connectivity, the physical infrastructure, which is going to connect this entire region, the social, ecological, economic system. And this has been convincingly proven in most of the analysis that if these four conditions of capital are satisfied, the fifth force of capital, financial capital, will flow to that particular district. So let's work on that. And then you find the FDI, domestic private investment, looking at this entire destination as an integrated economic destination where they're going to invest in, put in their money. So it is not merely from the perspective of a motor vehicle segment. Let us look at it from other forces, trade and investment.
Sure. Thanks, Nilanjan. That's a very, so broadening the scope of how we look at the integration. And I think today, this follows what Professor Shiv Shankar Menon said in the morning, to say that how do we look at it as an ecosystem. And Dr. Shankar Sharma, I'll come to you later, your views on the connectivity. But I would like to move to Iqbal to see that, how is Nepal viewed in, like you've been with the Institute in ISS, and how is Nepal viewed? Is there a relevance around Nepal? Is there an interest around Nepal, around what's happening in Nepal, in the Southeast Asian regions, in Singapore, around? So this is some conversations we've been having, but it's something to be good for others to also understand.
Sure. Thanks, Sujeev. Given that my fellow panelists have raised the key geopolitical, economic issues, let me take your question head on with the way of how is Nepal studied? Is Nepal studied as well in the rest of the world? And keeping the time ticking away in mind, let me try and address this question with two issues. Firstly, how is the study of Nepal framed? And the issue of agency, in the study of Nepal itself, when Nepal is studied. So firstly, very briefly, in terms of framing, traditionally, Nepal in universities and even research institutes and think tanks was always studied and approached in terms of a broader study of South Asia. And the demographic and geopolitical realities of South Asia mean that much of the focus was in India, and after India, Pakistan, and then if there was some space, Bangladesh, then the rest of countries. That's how it generally was taught. And the nation state idea, the borders were important in its study. However, increasingly, the idea of reframing the way South Asian history and politics is taught is gaining hold. One example that is of importance to Nepal itself would be the idea of academics teaching courses such as Himalayan studies, Himalayan history, Himalayan politics, etc. Now, if you look at it from that frame, Nepal is at the core of these studies. Yeah. So this is a growing trend, and I don't want to belabor the point too much here. The other issue is that even with research institutes and think tanks, there's an increasing focus on thematic issues, be it connectivity, sustainability, energy, etc. And I think a number of institutes are belatedly realizing that Nepal is actually very important to all of these themes. So there is an increasing interest. Now, very briefly on the issue of agency. This is where I lament somewhat that the study of Nepal at least in think tanks and institutes, in many think tanks and institutes, is still linked to it being a reactor to what China is doing, what India is doing, etc. And I think that we need to turn that around to look at Nepal's active participation in multilateral forums, but also looking ahead how it will respond to multilateral institutions and the rise of the new ecosystem.
No, thank you, Iqbal. I think definitely, looking at the thematic areas and especially around the Himalayas, as you know, from the morning we've been discussing about the climate change, and if you look at the vulnerability around climate change, and it's one of the most fragile ecological area we belong to, and which is connected to the impact that it can have in the region. So I think also the just to uh, add on what's happening in Africa, we see is that how Africa is being looked at as one piece of 54 countries rather than trying to look at the boundaries. And you may have political issues, you may have other issues, but on thematic areas of sustainability, climate change, trade, there has been a lot of integration that has happened, and it's happening at a very accelerated pace, and that also has impacted the geopolitics around, China, US, India, others wanting to get a piece. So I'd come to Ambassador Sharma in terms of, what Nilanjan was talking about, and for us, as somebody who believe in this whole concept of, pointing the concept of East-South Asia, and which is looking at Nepal's connectivity with the eastern parts of South Asia. That's where our future is. So how have you been, experiencing that in the past couple of months as you're sitting in now a very official position? Earlier you're leading a think, the EPI, and looking at it from one perspective, but now from a government representative perspective, how we are seeing.
I think there are many things to be done, no doubt about that. One of the areas I think people were talking this morning as well as now is about the integration. When I went to see the Minister for Highways, I think he was for the next 10 minutes giving me examples how you can reduce the cost of doing business in Nepal. I think he is so versed about the cost of railway, the cost of highways, cost of waterways, and benefit of water resource development between Nepal and India. So I think one of the emphasis that has been given now by both governments, and Nepal, as business community for the sake of integration, is on the connectivity side. I think when we say connectivity side, I think there are many things that can be done. The eastern part of India is also equally important, but more than that, I think one of the immediate activities I think that has been taken was on the ICP. Because if we see today's newspaper, I think there's kilometers and kilometers of trucks waiting to clear the customs in Bhairava. So I think that is one of the areas where we need to improve to reduce the cost of doing business also. Now the second one, definitely this, I think we have been also talking about the railways, especially from the Indian side. This is Raxaul-Kathmandu Railway. I think they are doing the DPR now. And according to the authorities in India, the cost will be reduced by at least 50%. Similarly, the pipeline that we are talking now of the petroleum, 2 more pipelines, that will reduce the cost of transporting petroleum by billions per annum. So I think the connectivity, whether that's in terms of trade facilitation, integration, or even more bringing more investment in Nepal in other areas, is probably one of the priorities that I see should be taken forward in the future. On the top of that, I think there are a number of issues. Definitely the hydroelectricity. I think there is also the component of transmission line, which is also connectivity part of it. I think that is definitely number one for Nepal, given the high trade deficit with India. And there are a number of other areas which we can explore in the future between countries also.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm seeing some questions coming up on the app on Events More, but I have a very, sort of something that I want to ask Aneka, and more like, it's not a crystal gazing, but if there are, looking at what's happening and, the convention coming up in Beijing and then the elections in Nepal, if there are 2 things you would like to see that we have to be watchful about as we are, just to watch what's going to happen between India and China, where it is going to go? Sorry, Nepal and China in the days to come. What are the 2 things you see based on what you've been reading on the Chinese media and what's happening in the Chinese social media?
Do you mean like in the recent
Yeah,
years?
recent years. So what would may happen? What are one or two trends we should be very mindful of
Okay.
as we are looking at happening?
One thing that I mentioned in my earlier answer was definitely the 20th National Congress, which is next month and which will pave the path, and it also marks Xi Jinping's third term. And so I feel like that is definitely something that we all need to be watchful for. And as I've already stressed, that in terms of China, we have to also look into party-to-party relations to understand China, because they have the saying that if there is no CPC, then there is no new China. I tried to translate that. But yeah, so we definitely have to keep our biases aside and try to understand China through a party lens as well. So that's definitely what I would say at the moment, the main thing we should be watching for.
Yeah. Thanks, Aneka. So there's a question that has come up from Anish, and so maybe I'll just direct this to Master Sharma in terms of about an identity. So when we are talking about Nepal and when we are looking at the world, and then especially now being an ambassador to United States, now ambassador. So what are some of the identities people look at Nepal from? Because internally we are always trying to project Everest. The granular discourse becomes, Everest is in Nepal, Gautam Buddha was born in Nepal, and that's what the question is as to where does you see the change? Is there any transformation in the identity? How do you? So that's the question.
Yeah, good question. I think definitely people talk about Nepal when they say that this is such a wonderful country, such a beautiful country. That's number one, everybody says. Number two is how friendly Nepalese people are. I think Nepalese people are very friendly. I think there's, in general, I think I'll say more than 95% of the people that Nepali people are honest, also very, very friendly. Third aspect, I think this is from India basically. India thinks that although constitutionally we are a secular country, but they think that, okay, Nepal is the only Hindu country in the world. So that's how I think they also see it. The reason is that you see hundreds of thousands of people going to India, I think every month in pilgrimage, Char Dham and all those things. Definitely Indian also, they would like to come to Nepal, Pashupatinath, Muktinath, Ansarovar, there are so many other places. So I think they also have that perspective here. But I think there are, again, from the perspective of a political perspective, if we go and talk with different, and not only Indians, but also from Western world, I think there are two that will talk about these in terms of geopolitical competition. First one is, I think it's slightly different compared to what it used 10, 15. Most of the countries, they would like to in three ways, many countries. Influence means all the countries like to influence, no doubt about that. One is trade, investment. The third one is also providing capital for development activity, bilateral. I think that has also been a bigger interest of bilateral countries. The second area is, no doubt about that, the political parties, students, youths. Third area, I think, highly concerned, and we should also be very careful. I think talk about these things. Unwanted people's interventions and activities in the border areas. I think whether we talk about north, south, west, this is one of the major concerns in many countries, not only to Nepal. Plus, the countries supporting those kind of activities, very sensitive in those areas. So I think there are whole lots of political issues and interests, but there are very goodwill and then attractiveness of Nepal in all respects.
Thank you, Master Sharma. I think so I was so tempted to answer that question because I've been always writing about brand smile being Nepal's biggest identity. So when people talk about Nepalis, it's about the smile that they always remember. about. And I think that we could really leverage. And if you look at in the hospitality industry, in the service industry around the world, and in 180 countries we are there, most of the places we are in the area where it is about front-end, sort of interaction. So be it in the malls of Dubai or in a restaurant Seychelles, or, it could be in a spa in, Scandinavia. You see Nepalis out there, and that's so tempted, so I had to plug in. So I think I would just, when people talk about, during lunchtime, people are talking about, okay, you guys do this conclave, then what happens after that? But I think these are areas in which you also get to meet people, discuss, and then the discussions would continue. So if, especially for Nilanjan and Iqbal, because you are leading to institutions, you are part of 2 institutions, of course, we have some relationships also in a Economic Forum. So if there were 2 or 3 things that you would like to, so from here, say, take ahead that we could collaborate and see, and to say that, okay, this is what we discussed at the Kantipur Conclave 2022, and this is what we can take up, and definitely partner institutions. So what would be those 1, 2, or 3 things? Nilanjan and
So you mean that what should Nepal be doing?
Nepal with your institution, so with
Okay.
your, with ORF, the new diplomacy initiative. So what are 1 or 2 things that we can start doing, and so that there is a sort of an action plan as we go ahead. And
Right.
I'm also saying this because with India we have our ambassador right here, so we can always leverage his sort of a position in Delhi to see how we can get that into reality.
See, at present, in fact, if I'm looking at things in a much more holistic platform, rather than looking at it from a reductionist GDP growth lens only, the biggest asset of Nepal happens to be the natural capital. And next comes the human capital. As for now, when I was just looking at some of these figures, I found that, especially the inclusive growth figures, between 1990 and 2014, natural capital of Nepal actually declined at the rate of 1%. Human capital increased at the rate of 1.7%. There hasn't been any growth, any substantial or mentionable growth in physical capital. Now, issue is that we, again, in most cases, in large parts of the developing world, what we find in whether it's in India or generally South Asia or Africa or Latin America or whatever, we find that physical capital has grown at the cost of natural capital. And that raises a very, very critical concern on the sustainability of the growth process as such. Biggest challenge of Nepal, India, including India, or suppose say Bangladesh, is how do we reconcile between the growth of physical capital and natural capital, right? Because one cannot afford to grow at the cost of the other. And that is where, in fact, we are bringing in this entire SDG paradigm, which essentially talks about the irreconcilable trinity of equity, efficiency, and sustainability. Yes, Nepal needs to bring about the efficiency dimension in its development paradigm. It needs to grow. Every nation needs to grow. We need to develop. At the same time, it needs to have distributive justice, equity, and other things, because poverty is a concern here in South Asia, in Nepal. Similarly, then how do we bring in these two, but without sacrificing on the element where we have the core competency, that is natural capital, the massive pool of the Himalayan waters will bring construction of large dams only bring about development. Let us rethink this paradigm again. So possibly now, in fact, it is imperative that we think about this not merely as a monodimensional development paradigm in the context of growth. We need to exploit the value chain that exists in this part of the world, whether it is with Nepal, Northeast India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, including South Sri Lanka. In fact, I'm just talking of the BBINA. Let it be the BIMSTEC as such, as a whole, including Thailand maybe. So this has to be brought into the framework. How can Nepal integrate itself in the broader value chain of South Asia, in the broader value chain of the ASEAN as well? Because there's a massive talent, massive potential in the context of the growth of the service sector. And let us face it, Nepal's growth driver is not going to be industry. Nepal's growth driver is going to be the services.
Thank you, Nilanjan. Now that's very apt. So there's a work to be done on value chain, work to be done on, somebody had just also had comments on skills, because if it is, then we are not dependent on manufacturing. Then if you're going to do service, then how do you do a skill development? How do you, look at, like if you're migrating, as I say, how do you do migration? You migrate to higher skills. So Iqbal, what would be one or two areas that could be something that we can work together on?
Just to add to the points that Nilanjan made, and very quickly, related to this issue is the issue of the demographics of Nepal as well. Very young population. So that's interlaced with points as well. In terms of agenda taking ahead, one of the things I've been very interested about hearing in the panels is we keep hearing South Asia, not India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. Nice to hear the term South Asia again. I think one of the things that most institutes can do is both broaden their focus, but also narrow their focus as well. And I remember I think it was 1998, Himal magazine, and I must plug the magazine, given that we are Nepal, published a map of South Asia that was upside down. And there were a lot of responses to it. And the tagline was, let's look at, if I remember correctly, the tagline was something to the effect that looking at South Asia in the right way. And I think that's very important. We need to broaden the way we look at South Asia, change the idea of peripheries and cores. But at the very same time, I think institutes also need to narrow their focus, because a lot of issues of trade, connectivity, exchanges, mobility are not central state issues. They're very local issues on the borderlands area. So I think we all collectively need to narrow our focus as well. In terms of agenda going ahead, I'd just like to say two very quick things. One is I have met so many brilliant students. I think all of us need to think about scholarly exchanges. Not just academics, not just established researchers, but student exchanges as well. And that's something that I think should be something we take forward.
Thank you, Iqbal. So there are just some questions flowing in. So maybe I want to rephrase that and I'm also looking at the clock to Aneka to see that since we are, this issue keeps coming out on demographics with 70% of our Nepalis being under 40, and when we were growing up, education was in India. If you had healthcare issues, it was India. Now, after the advent of e-passports, people have been all over. So, how do younger people perceive China and the relationship? Is that going through transformation where there's more interest on what's happening in China, because you have a lot of followers of what you guys are. And especially among the young people, do you see a paradigm shift compared to some of the older generation?
Do you mean those who have been to China?
Oh no, I mean just as a perception,
general?
younger people thinking of China, and is there, how do they perceive it, and what are the reaction to what you guys have been writing and doing?
Like, it goes without saying that we still don't know so much about our northern neighbor. It's still the case. Definitely a bit more now, especially after the more increasing presence of China. But among, at least in my observation, at least they have to go to China to actually see and actually experience what they've seen in the media and the news over here. So, but then the reality in ground is I feel like people still find China very mysterious. There are a lot of Chinese in Nepal, and we know that for a fact that they don't really integrate into our society. And that's probably why Tamil looks more like Chinatown. And I feel like that's the problem here, because that's exactly why there's still nervousness, or people still feel like, why are Chinese so mysterious? You always see news about cybercrimes and all this, which definitely affects China's image. And I feel like there's also a lack of effort from the not just the Chinese people relation, but also in terms of the embassy's effort to their image, which actually they're more focusing on other aspects. So this is just one of my observations.
Thank you. I think the clock is ticking, so any final 30-minute interventions from any of the panelists, a quick 30 minutes, any final thoughts you have before I wrap up? 30 seconds interventions, anything? Dr.
I don't
Sharma,
have
any last
anything.
words?
Thank you and congratulations for successfully conducting this panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a great way to end this panel. I think it's great to have perspectives, and I'm so happy that Iqbal could travel, Nilanjan could travel. I mean, Dr. Sharma could come here, and we really need to keep these discussions going from our side, from sort of Nepal and the World program at the Nepal Economic Forum. We are keeping this discourse going, expanding our relationships, and trying to see that let's look at Nepal that is one of the, if we were in Europe, we would have been the 5th largest populated countries, the 6th largest, sort of in terms of size. We are not a small country, and our wings are spread up to 180 countries. And I think the way Nepal should look at the world and the world should look at Nepal should change. On that note, thank you very much. A round of applause to our panelists, and thank you for being part of it. And over to you, Sujeev.
Thank you very much to our moderator for still keeping a minute on the clock and wrapping up this fabulous session on Nepal and the world. Yes, Nepal is the land-linked country between India and China, a country with the highest mountain, a people with the biggest heart and definitely the widest smile, like everybody agreed on this panel. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for this fabulous panel here at Kantipur Conclave 2022.
Thank you so much.
We talked about Nepal and the world, and now we focus a bit more on the soft powers that Nepal has. We're getting ready for the 5th and the very last session here at the first